You're now listening to the Lone Wolf
The Lone Wolf podcast.
Alrighty, everyone. Welcome to podcast number 25. Let me just get into it. Had a pretty okay morning. I went and I did bench press and shoulder press, and I did some flies. And oh my gosh, at least with my chest, you could definitely tell it's been a while since I've done it. 205 was heavy. I mean, I at one point I was pushing like 305 for my 1 rep max, which in the world of like powerlifting isn't that impressive, but I've definitely fallen quite a bit of ways from where I came. But it's nice, I've dropped probably 35 or more pounds, and my joints are definitely thanking me for that. But besides that, it's been kind of a lazy day. It's rainy and overcast here in Alton, Illinois. We get quite a bit of rain in the summer, which is good. We got a lot of farmland here. But besides that, let me just get into what I'm actually going to talk about during the podcast. So I like to start off with the first thing, which is good news to me, and it's something that doesn't really surprise me, and it's just the way that markets evolve and ways of sending out information evolve. So it turns out that fashion companies are starting to, and not just like new trendy ones on Instagram, like established fashion brands, instead of doing print publications, even if it's on like Kindle or through subscription services like Texture and all that, people just don't want to read magazines anymore. So because of that, these fashion companies such as Hypebeast, Gucci, Margiela, and GQ are finding new audience through podcasting. And you know what? It makes so much sense. People either consume their media visually on platforms like YouTube and Instagram via pictures and videos, or they consume it via podcasts and streaming services. I find that I listen to podcasts more than I do songs. I think more and more there's a thirst for knowledge and to hear long-form versions of opinions and thought. And what better way for a fashion company to let their customer into the product than doing a podcast about it? I know that I personally would love to hear about the inspiration, the dedication, the fabrics, the cuts, distribution, and all that stuff that goes into getting a product into customers' wardrobes. I don't know. I love podcasting just for fun, conversation. But I don't know. I think it's really cool to see how it's heavily, there we go, influencing things I love, like fashion, movies, cinema, and just entertainment in general. Hopefully I can get to that level someday. So, with that, I will segue into recent entertainment news. News of Michael Jackson has come out that he was a castrato, a practice that the world thought died in 19th century Italy. Michael Jackson's doctor has claimed the singer's father, quote, chemically castrated him as a boy to prevent him from developing and to maintain his high voice. In Dr. Murray's words, the fact that Michael was chemically castrated to maintain his high-pitched voice is beyond words. For those of you listening who don't know what chemical castration is, here's what it is. Chemical castration is castration via anaphrodisiac drugs, whether to reduce libido and sexual activity, to treat cancer, or otherwise. Unlike surgical castration, where the gonads are removed through an incision of the body, chemical castration does not remove organs, nor is it a form of sterilization. But since I'm on the topic of music via Michael Jackson, let me just transition into, and trust me, there's a connection here, but I had this weird dream today. It's the first dream I've had in a while that I can actually remember. Usually the ones I remember after I wake up are profound, and I usually try to dissect them and to see what meaning they hold or what message is trying to be like told to me. But this one just was random. So somehow I ended up at this big event space that a music festival was happening at. Then it skips forward to some band playing, and when they get to the hardcore part of their song, I start jumping around, but it's more like I was hopping my way to the front of the crowd. But it wasn't just me doing that. I hopped to the front with these guys who were wearing white, glow-in-the-dark hats. Who knows, maybe I had one on too. Then I remember looking at a screen to see who was all at this festival, and it was so random. Pitbull was there amongst these rock bands, these hardcore rock bands. There might have been a few more pop stars I don't remember that were on the screen. So then there's another flash forward, and come to find out that the band I was rocking out to was the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I think they only played 2 songs, then came to the crowd in the front and started signing memorabilia like vinyls and stuff like that. But the lead singer, who usually has a nice head of hair, was shaved bald. And while he was apologizing, I was trying to console him. After consoling him, I turned around to find some dinner tables set up sparingly with people actually sitting down in them. And then I woke up. Now, let me just try to point out what I think was wrong with that dream. 1, they wouldn't have a festival in something that is half the size of an airplane hangar. 2, there would definitely be way more people at a festival that has Pitbull and Red Hot Chili Peppers. And 3 and 4, the lead singer wouldn't buzz his head, and they wouldn't put freaking dinner tables at a concert. Actually, I forgot to put this at the beginning of the podcast, but it's another random thing happened throughout my week. I usually go hiking at La Vista Park here in Godfrey, and sometimes I'll take the Great River Road back instead of, I forget whatever route it is. But as I turned left to go to get onto the River Road to head back to Alton, I seen something, and it was quite possibly the most American thing I've ever seen. I saw a guy who was decked out in American flag pants, American flag shirt, bald eagle helmet, there we go, and was riding a Harley Davidson. I don't remember if he had satchels on the bike, but if he did, I imagine they were filled with Budweiser. If there wasn't a divide on the road I was on, I probably would have taken a U-turn, taken a picture with him, or gifted him a copy of the Declaration of Independence or something. All right, now that the funny stuff is over, let me head on to the political stuff, because there's so many things happening in the world. And if you go on the Drudge Report, you get all kinds of articles from conservative, liberal, in between news, and it's just enough news to make your head spin. To make your head spin. But one of the ones I came across was this: once oil wealthy, Venezuela's largest state struggles to keep the lights on. Cindy Morales, 36, says, "I never thought I would have to go through this. I don't have food, I don't have power, I don't have money." Zulia, the historic heart of Venezuela's energy industry that was for decades known for opulent oil wealth, has been plunged into darkness for several hours a day since March, sometimes leaving its 3.7 million residents with no electricity for up to 24 hours. In the past, Zulians considered themselves living in a Venezuelan Texas, rich from oil, and with an identity proudly distinct from the rest of the country. Oil workers could often be seen driving new cars and flew by private jet to the Dutch Caribbean territory of Curaçao to gamble their earnings in casinos. Once famous for its all-night parties, now Maracaibo is often a sea of darkness at night due to blackouts. The 6 state-owned power stations throughout Zulia have plenty of oil to generate electricity, but a lack of maintenance and spare parts causes frequent breakdowns, leaving the plants running at 20% capacity. Energy Minister Louis Mata said this month that power cuts of up to 8 hours a day will be the norm of Zulia, while authorities developed a stabilization plan. He did not provide additional details, and the Information Ministry did not respond to a request for comment. Although Caracas has fared far better than Maracaibo, a major outrage hit the capital city on Tuesday morning for around 2 hours due to a fault at a substation. The Energy Minister said heavy rains had been reported near the substation. Venezuelans were forced to walk or cram into buses as much of the subway was shut. Long lines formed in front of banks and stores in the hopes power would flick back on. The fault also affected some phone lines and the main Maqueda airport just outside the capital. Nasari Parra, 50, is quoted saying, "This is terrible. I feel helpless because I want to go to work, but I am in this queue instead," as she waited in a line of 20 people in front of a closed bank. Retiree Judith Palmer, 56, took advantage of having power to cook one afternoon last week in Maracaibo. When the lights do go out, Palmer wheels her paralyzed mother outside because the house becomes intolerably hot. One power cut damaged an air conditioning unit, which Palmer cannot afford to replace on her pension of about $1.50 cents a month due to inflation. Zulia used to produce 70% of Venezuela's milk and meat, but without power to milk cows and keep meat from spoiling, the state's production has fallen nearly in half, according to Venezuela's National Federation of Ranchers. Zulia's proportion of Venezuela's total oil production has also slipped over the past 10 years from 38% to 25%. Figures from state oil company PDVSA show. Maracaibo, Venezuela's second-largest city, seems like a ghost town, said Fergus Walsh, head of local business organization. He said business had shortened their operating hours due to the lack of power. Before business, activity here was booming, he said. Small businesses are also affected. In an industrial park in Maracaibo's outskirts, 80% of the 1,000 companies based there are affected by the power cuts. Sales at Americo Fernandez spare parts store are down 50% because card readers, which are crucial because even the cheapest goods require unwieldy piles of banknotes, cannot be used during power cuts. Quote, I have had to improvise to stay afloat. I connect the car battery to the store so that the card readers can work, Fernandez said during a power outage at his home, surrounded by candles. Which brings me to my next point, and I can't believe we become so spoiled and so insulary in our experiences that it's finally begun. And what has begun? A debate over socialized healthcare. Popularized by socialist Bernie Sanders, Medicare for All is not just a fringy left-wing talking point anymore. It's a fringy plank of a growing element of the Democratic Party. From the conservative Mercatus Center, concludes that Medicare for All would increase federal spending by almost $33 trillion during the first 10 years. This would require roughly $3 trillion in higher taxes every year to finance the program. And how would Democrats pay for it? Well, the bill, sponsored by Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, calls for massive tax increases, including a 7.5% payroll tax on businesses, a 4% healthcare premium assessed on households, much higher income taxes on wealthy Americans, up to 52%, higher death taxes, higher capital gains taxes, and fewer tax deductions. In other words, the Medicare for All Democrats would wipe out the tax cuts that took effect in January and then add trillions more. Every one of them should be forced to explain on the record how that would affect the economy. Although the tax cuts have been in place for barely half a year, they've already sparked an economic boom. Just last week, the Commerce Department reported GDP growth of 4.1%, the fastest rate of growth in years. Unemployment is at a near record low, and jobless claims for African Americans and Hispanics are the lowest in history. The Democrats argued that higher taxes would be offset by lower healthcare premiums, but that's a little too clever. In fact, according to Kenneth Thorpe of Emory University, quote, there are going to be a lot of people who pay more in taxes than they save in premiums. It should be noted that Mr. Thorpe was a senior healthcare policy advisor to former President Bill Clinton. If Obamacare is a time bomb, Medicare for All would be a nuclear explosion. It would crush the entire economy under trillions in new taxes, and it wouldn't merely restrict choices as Obamacare does. It would eliminate choices altogether. Americans would be herded into a program run by the federal bureaucracy, and they would pay more for it. So, on top of socialism, another thing the lefties and the intersectional feminists want on top of socialized healthcare is for Islam, the supposed religion of peace's Sharia Law, to be welcome on American soil. So, just in case you need a reminder on how wonderful it is for women under Sharia law, I have a news article from The Sun. A Saudi Arabian couple have been arrested after a man filmed himself giving his girlfriend a peck on the cheek as he gave her a driving lesson. This comes just a little bit more than a month after women were given the right to drive in Saudi Arabia. Even though they were given this privilege, there's still a lot of restrictions on women under Saudi Sharia law. Here are 6 examples. Make major decisions without male permission. Although guardianship is not enshrined in or written in law, government officials, courts, businesses, and individual Saudis generally act in accordance with it, meaning that in practice, women need their guardian's consent for any major activity, including travel, obtaining a passport, getting married or divorced, and signing contracts. 2. Wearing clothes or makeup that show off their beauty. The face does not necessarily need to be covered, but this does not stop the religious police from harassing women for exposing what they consider to be too much flesh or wearing too much makeup. 3. Interact with men. Women are required to limit the amount of time spent with men to whom they are not related. 4. Go for a swim in public. Women are not allowed to use public swimming pools available to men, and can only swim in private ones or female-only gyms and spas. Numbers 5 and 6. Compete freely in sports and try on clothes when shopping. To all those intersectional feminazis Those are just a small handful of things you can do freely in the States that you wouldn't have with Sharia, along with being groomed and beaten. Does that still sound wonderful to you? Which brings me to my next article. A Chinese-Canadian rally showed up to protest the proposed housing of refugees in Markham, a city northeast of Toronto. And this is just my opinion here. These people aren't refugees. They're political tools used to fulfill the caliphate. They've done it in most of Europe, but I'm glad people in London, France, Italy, and now Canada aren't putting up with the nonsense that these people are bringing. And I think that most of England, not just London, are going to fight back after hearing the conditions in which Tommy Robinson lived during his prison sentence. He was sentenced for contempt of court because he dared to cover the news of a trial of the poor Muslim refugee pedophiles. In a live broadcast to Facebook, now deleted, Robinson can clearly be heard saying he is aware of reporting restrictions, which his lawyers argue shows he was attempting to avoid breaching them. The judge who rushed to send activist Tommy Robinson to jail did not even watch the full video in which he supposedly breached contempt of court laws, his lawyers have claimed. And here's an audio clip of how he was treated as a political prisoner in this prison.
Prisoners would regularly be given access to the front of Tommy's cell, and they would open up the flap to his cell and shout at him threats. And this was permitted by the prison. It's obviously a form of psychological torture. Let me give you more examples. There is a window in Tommy's cell for a breeze in the hot summer, but prisoners were permitted to go up to the window and spit into Tommy's cell, which is a form of assault and battery, and it's gross, and it's psychologically abusive. So Tommy had to shut his window in this particularly hot British summer. Tommy's cell door, remember, he was in his cell, and it was locked. He was locked in to protect him from the other prisoner. Well, on at least 3 occasions, his cell door was accidentally not locked. Accidentally, eh? Be a shame if an accident happened to Tommy in prison. Who was it in the British prison system who was trying to get Tommy murdered? Tommy was only allowed to phone home during the lunch hour, so he was unable to speak with his children because they were at school. That is an arbitrary and punitive decision by the prison. And as I reported when I was at the hearing, on 3 occasions when Tommy's lawyers tried to meet with him, on 1 occasion, that meeting was canceled by the prison. No explanation, no warning, no appeal, just canceled. That's how you treat a political prisoner. That's not a prisoner in the UK, is it? And on the 2 occasions they did meet, those meetings were cut short. The jailers slow-walked, took their time to bring Tommy to the lawyers, cut those legal meetings in half. That's one of the reasons Tommy's delay was filed late, because he couldn't get a proper meeting with the lawyers. Let me ask you a question. Some would say that solitary confinement is a form of torture. I don't know about that, but I know it is for 13 months. And I know it is for 13 months where other prisoners are allowed to come right up to you and shout threats into your prison, threats of murder, and threats against Tommy's wife. I know it's a form of torture when people are allowed to spit at you with the permission or the blind eye, the willfully blind eye of the prison authorities, so much so that he had to bake in this hot British summer. And we now know, because of the court appeal ruling today, that not only was this conviction a false conviction, not only was it legally inappropriate and flawed in every way, not only do we know that a 13-month imprisonment was absurdly disproportionate, but we also know that deeming Tommy a criminal, where in fact contempt of court in this case was not a crime, put him in this abusive position falsely. Every single thing that Tommy and his supporters have said was vindicated today. I'm so glad he's going home. But you know what? Justice is not fully done. Tommy's conviction was quashed, but we still don't know who or why Tommy was treated this way in prison, why he was sent to a more dangerous prison, and why this abusive treatment of him was countenanced by the prison authorities. That demands to be answered.
All right, so that ends the political segment. Now on to the financial segment. Apple becomes the first American company to have $1 trillion market cap. $1 trillion. And I was just thinking, this is probably yet another news article that makes Ronald Wayne wince when he reads it. And if you don't know who Ronald Wayne is, I'll tell you. Ronald Wayne is an American retired electronics industry worker. He co-founded Apple Computers, now Apple Incorporated, with Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, providing administrative oversight for the new venture. However, he soon sold his share of the new company back to Jobs and Wozniak for $800 and later accepted $1,500 to forfeit any claims against Apple. If Wayne had kept his 10% stake in Apple Incorporated, it would have been worth about $100 billion, given the new market value, making him the second richest man on earth. The first company, however, to hit $1 trillion wasn't Apple. It was a company called PetroChina, although they collapsed big time and ended up costing shareholders $800 billion after all the losses. I don't see that happening with Apple, however. And Amazon will probably be the second company, American company, to hit the $1 trillion market cap. However, you know what's cooler than $1 trillion? $2 trillion. A Saudi Arabian oil giant named Saudi Aramco, who intends to go public in 2019, is expected to have a $2 trillion evaluation, according to Financial Times. Now I need to see if I can buy some shares to get a little piece of that. And the last little tidbit that I thought was funny that I figured I'd just squeeze in here is this is kind of like a little tech news, but an article by Nielsen shows that American adults spend
666 minutes a day consuming and interacting with media.
Illuminati confirmed. Tech companies are the devil and shall be rebuked in the name of the Lord. Alrighty, that concludes episode 25. I appreciate it so much if you listen all the way through. This podcast is also on Spotify as well. Feel free to go over to Spotify and also to iTunes and just give me a good rating. Give me some feedback. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you want me to talk about, things I could improve upon, stuff like that. Also, head over to Lone Wolf Productions, and I'm going to put the link in the episode page. And give the page a like. You know, that's where I do my photography, videography, and podcast. I do it under the umbrella of Lone Wolf Productions. But yeah, that's it, and I'll see you on episode 26. Have a good day, everyone.